1 year ago, a massive explosion tore through Beirut, leaving a trail of destruction and death. Today, survivors are still demanding answers. The tragedy also exposed just how paralyzed Lebanon's government has become. With an economy and currency in freefall, things don't look like they'll be getting better anytime soon. Adding to the country's misery are recent airstrikes by Israel in southern Lebanon, which Israel says is in response to rocket attacks. So how deep is Lebanon's crisis right now? Let's take a look at this report.
كل 10 زبونات يجوا يمكن 8 بنقول لهم انه ما عندنا بدواء. انت مثل ما شايف يعني الادويه الرفوف فاضيه.
And to discuss where Lebanon could be headed, joining me now from Beirut is Lama Fakih. She is the Director of Crisis and Conflict at Human Rights Watch. And from Istanbul, Bachar El-Halabi. He is a Senior Geopolitical Analyst at ClipperData, a research and analytics company. A warm welcome to you both. So, Bachar, let me begin with you. Could Lebanon's crisis and situation get any worse? Where does the country stand now?
Good evening and thank you. This has been the billion-dollar question ever since the uprising of October 2019. The situation back then was extremely dire. Banks had closed their doors for about 2 weeks and people weren't able to withdraw their money. It's been a year and a half. And this has been the question ever since. People have run out of electricity, they've ran out of fuel for their cars, they've ran out of medication and even children's milk. So in addition to the fact that above 50 to 60% of the Lebanese population currently resides under the poverty line. So can this situation get any worse? Of course it can, because the current criminal sectarian ruling elite has not shown any will or any anticipation in order to solve the crisis, or at least to put the country on a path or a track to be able to cushion the current implosion, the imminent implosion. But is it possible to ask those people for safety and for reforms? I think this is impossible right now.
So, Lama, 1 year from the devastating blast in Beirut and families of victims are still wanting answers. What's the situation? Will Lebanon's ruling class, for example, be held accountable for the crisis? What stands in the way? Will the victims of the explosion ever see justice?
So we have been monitoring the domestic investigation since August of last year. And what we have seen since then is that the judicial process has been mired in due process concerns, in fair trial concerns, in the absence of judicial independence, and of course plagued by immunities. And as of yet, there has not been a political willingness to lift these immunities. Until that happens, we will not see justice in Lebanon. And unfortunately, we have yet to see international action that would take steps forward to advance justice, including at the UN Human Rights Council, but also amongst individual states who could take actions like targeted sanctions against those officials that are responsible, but have yet to do so.
So why do you think, Bachar, the investigation into the blast has stalled?
Well, the investigation has stalled because impunity reigns supreme in Lebanon ever since the civil war days. We know that the Taif Agreement, which brought the civil war to an end in 1989, granted a a form of impunity to everyone, or an amnesty law was granted to all the different warlords and stakeholders that were the perpetrators of the civil war. And ever since, they have the process of state building, of truth finding, of transitional justice was never attained. And what happened in reality was a transformation of warlords into people in suits and blocks in parliament, and a dissection of the Lebanese state and its institutions, its services, and the public sector into fiefdoms, sectarian fiefdoms of the same warlords. So it is impossible today to even visualize justice and accountability in a country where the perpetrators of all the misery of the Lebanese citizens and residents as well that have experienced over the past 30, 40 years to be the ones actually to hold themselves accountable.
Yeah, so Lama, how has this sectarian political system served Lebanon so far? And do you believe there is a need for a renewed system, maybe a constructural change? If so, how?
So what we've documented in our latest report, They Killed Us from the Inside, is that the explosion of August the 4th needs to be understood in a context of broader impunity and corruption, which has, as Bachar has said, reigned supreme in Lebanon, and did in fact reign supreme at the port. And what we saw is that after the civil war, the political parties divided responsibility and interests in the port between themselves. They were interested in ensuring that they all benefited from the port structure, and not in ensuring that the port was functioning in a way that would ensure, for example, that prohibited goods, harmful goods were not brought into the port, and that they, in this case, were allowed to languish in the port for over 6 years, a bomb lighting in wait. And we've seen all the sort of devastating consequences of that.
So amid this crisis, Bachar, what do you make of the latest Israeli attacks on southern Lebanon? I mean, how will this further complicate the situation in the country?
This brings into the spotlight one of the major challenges that Lebanon faces at the moment, or that has faced ever since 2005 till today. We know that the crisis and the implosion we are living in Lebanon at the moment is out of own making. Okay, our politicians, the ones that elected politicians, unfortunately reached to or at least drove the country off the cliff. However, we also know, and what's happening right now in southern Lebanon, or at least over the past 48 hours, attests to the fact that Lebanon is taken hostage by a militant group who functions according to a regional agenda, that of the Iranian expansionist agenda, unfortunately. And to make things worse, the newly appointed, not elected, the newly appointed president in Iran has announced his will, in a way, yesterday during his inauguration, in order to keep supporting this agenda in a way to secure Iran's regime's survival.
So, Lama, the currency, we know that has lost more than 90% of its value, and more than half of the population has been propelled into poverty. I mean, how do people survive in Lebanon?
Yeah, I mean, we can speak in figures, but the figures really do not exemplify what is happening here on the ground. We're really talking about families who cannot pay to keep the lights on, who cannot pay to buy medications for their families, who cannot afford even a single meal a day. To say that people are destitute does not fully encompass the suffering. And despite all of this, we have seen a failure for the political class to come together to appoint a new government and to institute badly needed reforms. Lebanon is desperately in need of a lifeline, and we do need to see some external pressures on our political leaders, unfortunately, to make it happen.
So, and I mean, I want to ask you this, just to get a sense of Lebanese politics, because the prime minister, even if he is a caretaker one, said Lebanon is on the verge of social explosion. I mean, what kind of picture does this give to us in terms of Lebanese politics?
I mean, on August the 4th, I was on the street with tens of thousands of other Lebanese, and you can feel the anger on the streets, and they're looking for an outlet. We've reached a point where we don't know who to look to anymore. The political class is not accountable to the people. And we have seen that there has been, while a lot of criticism of the Lebanese government, a failure really to take to task these officials who are responsible for egregious violations of human rights. And this is why we are, and others have, called for targeted sanctions against those in government that are implicated in ongoing rights abuse. We need to see more than just rhetoric coming from countries that profess to care about the future of Lebanon.
So we know that Bashar political squabbling has blocked the formation of a new government that is needed to unlock international aid. So what's the biggest obstacle before the elections, and who is obstructing steps to form a new government there?
From the looks of it, it seems that the president of the republic and his son-in-law are mostly to be blamed for the obstruction of government formation in Lebanon. And I say this drawing on the conclusion that a prime minister designate at the time, Saad al-Hariri, enjoyed, to a certain extent, international and regional backing. And he was trying to form a government, although this government was not going to be popular among the Lebanese, but he was trying to form a government according to the French roadmap, which President Emmanuel Macron agreed on with the different Lebanese sectarian leaders in Lebanon when he visited the country. However, Saad al-Hariri 9 months later failed. He stepped down. A new prime minister designate, Najib Mikati, stepped up. By the way, Najib Mikati was the prime minister, the caretaker prime minister, when the shipment of ammonium nitrate entered to Lebanon, to add insult to injury. But anyways, Najib Mikati over the past week or so has been saying that, first of all, progress in talks with the president are very slow, very minimal, and he seems to be citing the same roadblocks that Saad al-Hariri faced during his own drive for forming a government. This means that President Michel Aoun might not be interested to form a government. President Michel Aoun is looking to ensure the future of his son-in-law, the US-sanctioned Gibran Bassil, and he might want to hold the country hostage in order to ensure that Gibran Bassil might be elected president to follow the president.
So, Lana, apart from the ruling elite, do Lebanese people lack the sense of unity? And is there a hope for reform there?
I continue to have hope. We have to have hope, I think, to continue, working for human rights in this country. We have seen in the past several years that there have been great strides in developing independent political parties and ensuring that people can be adequately represented by their political leaders. I think there continues to be a question as to whether there will be elections on time next year in this country. That is something that we hope, again, all countries that are caring about Lebanon's future stability will continue to push forward and insist upon. But of course, civil society needs room to develop and to grow. And there continue to be laws in Lebanon, including criminal defamation laws, that are being used to target activists. We continue to see excessive use and unlawful use of force against protesters in the street. This is all stifling of the ability for groups to come together. And this is another area where we need to see reforms.
So, Bashar, on a wider scale, what could a failed Lebanon mean for the region? Who is likely to benefit from a failed state, and what kind of ramifications it would have on the already conflicting interests in the region?
Well, Lebanon has always been a theater for regional meddling, whether throughout the years of the civil war or the post-war era, where the Saudis had interests and they were heavily involved in Lebanese politics. So was the Syrian regime and the Iranians, of course. Nowadays, a failed Lebanese state, which is we are almost there, by the way, it's happening, can definitely pose a major threat and risk, first of all, on its citizens. And this is, and the August 4th port explosion is a major example of how criminal this sectarian elite can be, or the results of their dealings can lead to. In addition to the fact that a failed Lebanon can mean that the country can transform into a narco state similar to the Syrian state, because Lebanese economy, the Lebanese and Syrian economies and politics are tied in a way, given that the major faction, the most powerful faction in Lebanon, Hezbollah, is an ally of the Syrian regime. And we have seen several major shipments of drugs being arrested around the world.
All right, Lama, Bashar, we'll have to leave it here. Thank you very much for joining us on Straight Talk.